On today's Locked On Jayhawks, the KU basketball season preview, beginner's guide for the 2024-25 season.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and this is Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you for making LOJ your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're going over our beginner's guide to the 2024-2025 KU basketball season, previewing the roster, the preseason hype, the schedule, what KU needs to do to win the Big 12 and get a 1 seed, and the biggest questions for KU to win the national title on today's episode, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can get Kansas at 11-1 odds to win the title. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So this is a bit of a beginner's guide if you haven't been tuning in to what's happening in basketball season, and we'll try to give a little bit extra here for the experts with everything going on. So if you're new or haven't been paying attention, KU might have had a tough year a season ago. They got a 4 seed, which for most schools would be a happy, great season. It would be a high point for a lot of schools. Not for Kansas, not for Bill Self. It was a down year. You lose in the second round. You bring back 3 starters, Dajuan Harris, KJ Adams, and Hunter Dickinson. And good things usually happen when Bill Self returns players, let alone All-American types like Hunter Dickinson. But there was kind of a running sense in late March, early April about, from many of the fan base about not necessarily wanting to be the case. And, I certainly have had questions about, well, how's it going to work with KJ playing next to Hunter and, Hunter defending ball screens and some of these things over the course of a season. But it feels like with the other moves they wound up making around them that they made it as viable as possible. We will see how it all fits together and how it all works. But you added a ton of shooting in the transfer portal, and you added some athleticism from your high school class. You obviously also returned Jamari McDowell, Zach Clements, as well as Marco Jackson, who unfortunately injured himself in the offseason. He's out for the season. But the 2 freshmen you added, Flory Bidunga, is a McDonald's All-American, springy center, high motor player. Sounds like he's getting better and better as things go on, which is what you love to hear for a young high potential freshman, and he's going to provide a nice spell for Hunter Dickinson off the bench. I mean, if you end up only playing Hunter 26, 27 minutes a night because you have to get Flory on the floor that much, no pun intended there, that's a good problem to have if you're KU, right? Rakis Passmore, he's a 4-star wing who Bill Self has compared to Ochai Agbaji. And yes, Ochai was not the same guy he was in year 4, year 3 as he was in year 1, but he was actually still a pretty impactful player in year 1. It was just a little bit inconsistent. If you got anything close to that from Rakis in year 1, I think you would take that. But he is a possible future star for KU that could have a role on this year's team. Then those transfers you added, Rylan Griffen, he's a 3-point sniper from Alabama. He was on their Final Four team. He was a starter, showed some defensive potential, wasn't always consistent on that end, but had potential for it. Now as a junior, 3-point marksman. You needed to add 3-point shooting, open up the floor for KJ and Hunter Dickinson and keep things off him. He provides that. AJ Storr, he could provide some shooting. I mean, low 30% from 3, but I expect that to go up in year 3. But he is just a scoring mercenary. He was an All Big Ten second-team pick, so in theory, one of the top 10 players in the Big Ten a year ago for Wisconsin. He comes over, and he could end up being a star of the team. What becomes interesting with Griffen and Storr is it could be down to 1 starting spot for those 2 players. And the reason why is because Zeke Mayo, one of the other transfers you brought in, another good shooter, another player who can really create offense at an elite level, off the bounce, off the catch, just makes a lot of winning plays. He was the Summit League Player of the Year. He took South Dakota State or helped them go to 2 NCAA tournaments appearances, and it sounds like he could be a starter next to Dajuan Harris. And if that's the case, with KJ and Hunter back, you're down to 1 starting spot between Rylan, Griffen, and AJ Storr. I've been leaning to the idea that AJ Storr would be my predicted 5th starter. I was reading the Blue Ribbon preseason college basketball magazine, and they talked to Bill Self. They talked to Hunter Dickinson. There's some quotes in there. It's a good little read before the season for them and, around the country. But their predicted starting lineup, which again, they are talking to Bill Self before the season starts. So, they're picking up news and nuggets as part of that. They had Rylan Griffen starting to be the fifth starter instead of AJ Storr. I still right now would be sticking my flag in the ground that it'll end up being Storr, but I am open to the idea that that could be the case. You also brought on David Coit. He's a small guard, big-time scoring ability from Northern Illinois. He could play kind of a Jalen Coleman-Lands role on this team. Maybe it ends up being a Jalen Coleman-Lands plus role on this team. And then the final guy is Shaquille Moore, who is an athletic defensive stud from Mississippi State. He's fearless. He's a smaller guard, but he will get up there, throw down some dunks. And like I said, really good athlete, really quick, can really play defense. Bill Self has made quotes in a couple different places. One of them was in that Blue Ribbon magazine. There was another one elsewhere that he could be the best, on-ball defender that the team has. So a lot of options that you have. They'll be able to play small. They'll be able to play big, right? You want to play Flory next to Hunter, you could do that. You want to play KJ next to Hunter, right? I consider that playing big. You can do that. You can play Clements next to KJ or whatever you want to do. You can play small with playing AJ Storr and Rylan Griffen on the wing along with two guards, right? Dajuan next to David Coit, or Dajuan next to Shaquille Moore, or Shaquille Moore next to Zeke Mayo, or Zeke Mayo, right? Whatever combination you want to do. You can play with extra shooters, right? You have options now where it's like with last year, it's like, okay, if we need a shooter, we're going to bring Timberlake in. If we need more of the defense ball handling, we're going to bring Marco in. Now it's like, okay, well, we have options. We could bring in Zeke, or we could bring in Rylan Griffen, or we can have AJ Storr in the game, or we can have Diggy Coit in the game. Certainly it feels like they have more depth than last season, and that's going to be a big storyline for this year's team that I think probably played a bigger factor on last year's team than you would expect, in the idea that, not only from the standpoint that KU had a lot of injuries last season, so having better depth would have been nice, and also that, they didn't really have a reliable bench, so just having a competent bench will be nice, but also that having that competent bench means the starters can play less minutes. They don't have to play 37 minutes in a key game. They can play 28, 30, 32. And if that means they're playing at a all-out max effort for 28 minutes, as opposed to having to maybe go three quarters on certain possessions and playing 36 minutes, what do you think is going to be better for the team? It's obviously that first way. And so Bill Self said multiple times during the offseason he wanted 8 starters. Feels like they might just have that at the end of the day. And because of all that, they wound up being number 1 in the preseason AP Top 25. There's certainly a lot of teams that are in the running this year for that, right? Like a lot of people thought Alabama was going to be that team. Houston is going to have a really great team once again. Iowa State and Houston are both ranked ahead of Kansas if you look at KenPom and Bart Torvik, two of the key, metric sites or online sites. In fact, KU is 6th on KenPom. They're 4th on Bart Torvik. You look at Evan Miyakawa, we like to reference their site as well. They're also 6th on Evan Miyakawa's site, and Houston 1st, Iowa State is 5th. So the Big 12 is going to be bare, and we'll get into that here in a second. But the expectation is always for Kansas, whether they're 1st in the preseason poll, whether they're 6th. It's contend for a Big 12 championship. I guess not contend. It's win a Big 12 championship. It's make a Final Four. It's contend for a national title. The normal Kansas things. You can still have good seasons where you don't accomplish all of those, but those are the ultimate goals at the end of the season, right? So now it's just about, what is this team? Is it just a polished version of last year's kind of underwhelming season, right? Where you have these players back from last year's team, but you still worry about the fits, but maybe you added a little bit more, that you do have a little bit better version of last year's team. And it's easy to look to that and say, okay, well, everybody likes to make the comparison of, okay, well, the 2022 team that won the national title, the 2021 team, they ended up on a low note, got crushed by USC in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Offense finished 54th in KenPom that year. They finished 27th overall in KenPom that year. They came back the next year with 4 or 5 returning starters, and it was like, are we sure this is what is best, that they have all these guys back? They ended up winning the national title. Well, you look at last year's team for KU, and they finished 27th on KenPom, 59th on offense. And so it's the same kind of idea that you're hoping for there. But it's also entirely possible, like I said, it's just a polished version of, instead of it being a revamped Kansas, it's a revamped, what if Kansas wasn't across the front of the jersey? What if I told you a random other team? In fact, here, let's just look at it this way. Who was 28th last year in KenPom? It was Wake Forest. If I told you Wake Forest, actually, let's go with Florida. Florida's 26th. I think that one's more applicable because they made the tournament. If I told you Florida returned, who was 26th in KenPom to finish the year last year, if I told you Florida returned 3 of 5 starters, and they were, a couple guys who had been in college a long time, another was, one of their best players. And then they added a really good transfer haul, like one of the better transfer hauls in the country. They added, a good high school recruiting class, not the number 1 class or anything, but a couple of good recruits. We'd probably be going into the season like, yeah, Florida's top 15 team in the country. Maybe they'd be top 10. But would they be number 1? Probably not. So that does get a little bit of bump. And maybe it's deservedly so because you just put your trust in Bill Self. Because for my money, he is still, even with Dan Hurley winning back-to-back titles, Bill Self is still the best coach in college basketball. So that kind of becomes the big question here. Is it a revamped version? Is it just a polished version of last year? Is it similar to that 2022 season? And we'll see what ends up happening here. And obviously included in all of it and other storylines of the season, you have a retooled Allen Fieldhouse. Heard good reports about what the sound system was like during late night in the fog. The student section moving up a little bit. Obviously, you lose a little bit of seatage. What's it going to be like there in Allen Fieldhouse where that $50 million renovation took place between the stadium and the offices? And it just adds another level to all of this and the new stuff of the season. And at the end of the day, it's KU basketball season. This looks to be a fun one on paper. We said that before in the past, and it's come crashing down. We've said that before, and it's lived up to the hype. So we'll see what this one does. Let's get into some more on this year's team, the schedule, and what KU needs to do if they want to win the Big 12 and get a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for small businesses, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, so for KU basketball, the schedule, as always, is absolutely loaded this year, as you would certainly imagine. It normally is. Obviously, the Big 12 is the best conference in the country, so that's going to make it easier to have the toughest schedule in the country, or one of the toughest schedules in the country. And KU certainly did not make it any easier in the non-con. Now, some of those were predetermined games and stuff like that, but it starts really this Friday with their exhibition at Arkansas. I know that doesn't count to the resume, but that gives you a good test. But you're taking on North Carolina in early November. That's just your second real game of the season. Then immediately after Champions Classic, Michigan State. You have Duke in Las Vegas. You're at Creighton, who should be good again this year. At Missouri, which, Missouri was really bad last year. I think they'll be better this year, but rivalry game on the road, that's not going to be easy. NC State made the Final Four last year. And then, the Big 12 schedule where Cincinnati should be a tournament team this year. Iowa State could be a top 5 team this year. TCU could be a tournament team. Houston's going to be one of the best teams in the country. You play them twice. Baylor's going to be, a top 20 team in the country. You play them twice. BYU could be pretty good, right? Texas Tech's going to probably be a top 25 team. Arizona's going to probably be a top 10 team. It's a loaded schedule for KU. So what do they need to do to win the Big 12? Well, it's tough figuring it out. I mean, it's always tough to figure out, to be completely clear. Just because of the standpoint of you just don't know what else is around you. It's probably pretty easy to guess right now that one of Houston, Iowa State, Arizona, Baylor, there's so many great teams in the league that somebody's going to have a really high mark in the conference. And that was the case last year, where as difficult as the league was, Houston finished 15-3 in conference play. So would it be easy to say that, 15-3 is going to get it done? But now that you have another version of the new Big 12 where you add Arizona into the fold in addition to other ones, could that be an extra loss for other teams, right? That it becomes really hard to say. It becomes hard to say because it's a 20-game schedule in the Big 12. It becomes hard to say because there's more variables. There's more teams in the league. There's more difficult places to travel to, like the road trip to the Mountain Time Zone where you go at BYU, at Utah or something like that, at Colorado. Does that wear you down for the game after that, right? Like there are all these other factors. And then the whole portion of imbalanced schedules. And also, does that make it winning the regular season in the Big 12 a little less prominent that for KU, like if you had the option between going undefeated in the non-con, you play all those good teams in the non-con, and then finishing, say, third in the Big 12 regular season versus winning the Big 12 regular season, but losing, say, 3 games in the non-con, I don't know. What do you choose? In Kansas' case, I think you still take the Big 12. Maybe that's a bad comp since you're winning the Big 12, so maybe that just makes it obvious. But let's say, let me do a different comparison. If you finish second in the Big 12 versus finishing fifth in the Big 12, but in the fifth scenario, you go undefeated in the non-con. Like maybe that one you end up taking, right? Because the imbalanced schedules just make it different to where like a team who finishes fourth or fifth in the Big 12 could be better than the team who finishes second and third. If, like in the case of Kansas, remember last year, Kansas had to go to Ames. They had to play at Iowa State, but they didn't get a return trip. And then you had, certain schools that maybe got a lot of the good teams at home, but didn't have to play a return trip. It's just imbalanced schedules, and it makes it a little less valuable. But right now in KenPom, they have Houston winning the league at 15-5. And you could easily say, well, they were 15-3 last year. So would it be more 16-4, 17-3? I don't know. I think over a 20-game schedule, that's going to be really hard to do. I think 15-5 is kind of the number that I'm looking at right now and saying, if you go 15-5, you're going to be right on track to possibly win this league. And it wouldn't shock me if 14-6 could even get it done. So be around that mark. I do think there's a chance that the Big 12 gets 2 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament. And if you can get to 14-6, especially with KU's non-con, I guess let's put it this way. If KU wins the Big 12, they're going to get a 1 seed. I feel like whoever wins the Big 12 is going to get a 1 seed. Unless I guess KU goes like 6-6 in the non-con. They're just like figuring stuff out. You win the Big 12, but if you're winning the Big 12, it probably means you're going to be pretty good in the non-con too. So you can lose 3 games in the non-con and win the Big 12. You're going to get a 1 seed. Let's say KU finishes second or third in the Big 12, maybe makes like the Big 12 tournament title game, and then goes 2 losses, maybe 1 loss in the non-con. You still are probably getting a 1 seed because at that point, again, if you're second and third in the Big 12, whoever finishes first is a 1 seed. And then if you only have 2 or 1 losses in the non-con, that means you racked up multiple wins against some sort of group between North Carolina, Michigan State, Duke, all these teams that you have to play Creighton in the non-con. If KU goes unbeaten in the non-con, I wonder what the minimum is they would need to do in the Big 12 to be a 1 seed. Like with 12-8, you go undefeated in the non-con. With 12-8 in the Big 12 regular season, which for all we know, that could be good enough to finish like third or fourth in the league. Would that be good enough to get a 1 seed? I don't know. That would certainly be an interesting conversation to get to, just because how loaded the Big 12 is and how loaded the non-conference schedule is. I guess part of that might depend on how they do in the conference tournament. But point being, KU basically has 2 chances. Like, I almost view it this way. If Kansas goes undefeated in the non-con or they win the Big 12, there's like probably a 90% chance that they get a 1 seed at that point. Like, it would take some really messed up stuff for you to do the rest of the way. It would take you collapsing in the other half of that schedule. So do one of the 2. There's a very good chance you're going to get a 1 seed, which we've typically seen with Bill Self teams. All right, what are the biggest questions for if KU can win the title? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the Chiefs game or whatever game you're watching, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can even bet on KU to win the national title, 11-1 odds. You throw the $5 up there to win 55. And you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed off that first $5 bet, but make sure to read the terms and conditions as well. That is at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on this episode, our beginner's guide to the upcoming season, KU season preview. What are the biggest questions for if KU can win the title? Now, obviously, there are different levels of this, right? For, some teams, it's what's their questions for making the NCAA tournament. For KU, you almost have those as a given. So there are certain things that KU might do average or good that if you want to win a title, you got to tighten up on, right? So the first one of these, what is the biggest question, is how much can they improve rebounding? Specifically, how much can you improve offensive rebounding? So you go back to last year's team for KU. They were a good enough defensive rebounding team. You look at nationally, they were 71st in the country in defensive rebounding. Look at the 2022 team. They were 196th. But what the 2022 team did well, they got offensive rebounds. They're 40th in the country in offensive rebound rate. They had a bunch of wings who were athletic. I always say this: positioning, strength, that wins defensive rebounding. Athleticism and hustle and verticality, that wins offensive rebounding. But KU last year, not a good enough offensive rebounding team. They were 286th in the country in offensive rebound rate. That was the worst offensive rebound rate of a Bill Self team in his time at Kansas. So, can you improve offensively rebounding the basketball? Do you have to be as good as that 2022 team? No, I don't think you do. But especially for a team who's going to play, like if you're going to be playing two big lineups, which I view KJ and Hunter as two big lineups, you could throw out a handful of minutes of Flory and Hunter, right? If you're playing Clements and Hunter, or Clements and KJ, or Clements and Flory, whatever it is, like whatever combination we're talking about here, if you're going to play two big basketball, you better win the ways that big men win. You know what I mean? Like, because if you're playing two bigs at the same time, there are automatic weaknesses that come with that, right? Foot speed on the perimeter, defending pick and roll, defending teams that can run and gun. But you try to make up for it by just dominating on the glass, by getting extra possessions, by fouling them out, by taking advantage of their lack of size. But if you can't get offensive rebounds, you're not taking advantage of the things you need to be taking advantage of. So how much better can you be at that? And, will that be something that KJ does better at? Will that be something that AJ Storr and Rylan Griffen can add to the team, even though they haven't specifically come in with a bunch of rebounding numbers? Is the different role at Kansas going to help with that? What are the rotations going to look like? What does the best lineup end up being? Like, how does KJ Adams end up fitting in all of this if you're Kansas? Is there a point in time in the season where Kansas decides, their best defensive lineup features, to close out a game, KJ and Flory, or KJ even at the 5? Is there a chance that KU finds their death lineup playing, AJ Storr at the 4 and KJ's on the bench, right? Like, you have to figure those things out. Who plays best with each other? What ways do you get through the season? Those are going to be important. Is the improved three-point shooting and overall shooting real? Like, that's another part of this too. You look at last year's team, they finished 195th in the country at 33.6% from three-point range. You look back at Bill Self's time at KU. So, if you look at the teams that had the biggest run, right? 2022 national championship team, they were 51st in the country in three-point percentage. The 2020 team that would have been the number 1 overall seed, they were kind of hovering the line, but they were just so elite at everything else that maybe that wouldn't have mattered. But they were still 132nd. The Final Four team in 2018, they were 10th. The Elite 8 teams in 2016, 2017 were both 5th. The Sweet Six, or the Elite 8 team in 2011, they were 24th in the country in three-point percentage. 2010 team, even though that was second round out, they were one of the best teams in the country all year long. They were 7th in three-point percentage. 08 was 14th. Then you look at some of the years where they've maybe underperformed. You look at last year, they were 195th. You look at the 2021 season, they were 173rd. You look at the 2019 season, they were 138th. So it's easy to it's not everything, but like, three-point shooting really does matter, even if you're a team that doesn't launch them as much as other teams. So you put a lot of effort into the portal to improve this, and I think they did, but how much better is it? Is it now just better from being below average, or is it like a strength? Is it a situation where you have like a really good three-point shooting team, right? That's going to kind of matter in all this. And then are you going to have a Dajuan Harris bounce back season? I don't think he was bad last year, but I don't think he was as good overall last year as he was the year before. And Bill Self has kind of talked about that. So can you get back to that Dajuan Harris from 2 years ago? The things that I think lessened a little bit were defensive consistency and the shooting inside for Dajuan. But if he can get back to those things he was doing 2 years ago with a more improved roster around him and be that best version of himself defensively, that's obviously a huge boon for KU. Can Hunter Dickinson be better on defense? Like, how much better can he get on defense, defending ball screens and those sorts of things? Again, does KU decide that when it's all said and done, if they need to stop at the end of the game, it's Flory coming in on the defensive end? I don't know. Can you trust the bench? That's something that you look at past national champions, they typically don't have deep benches, but they do at least have 1, 2, sometimes 3 guys that they can trust. Don't have to be playing 9, 10 guys. Don't have to be playing 11 guys. You need at least one or two guys you can trust. And you look at the 2022 championship team, echoes that. Mitch Lightfoot was one of those guys you could trust off the bench. It was, only 10, 12, 14 minutes per game, but you could trust him coming off the bench, filling his role. Remy Martin, by the end of the season, it wasn't always that way over the course of the season, but by the end of the season when it mattered, you could trust that coming off the bench. And, you look at teams in the past for Bill Self, they've had at least a couple of those guys. I think you're going to have that this year because you'll probably have one of Rylan, Griffen, or AJ Storr off the bench. At least on paper right now, I would trust that. I guess you never really know how things are going to translate. You never really know if Flory Bidunga as a young freshman is going to translate, but all the reports seem like it will to some extent. I guess we'll wait and see, but they have enough options there that I feel like that will happen. But yeah, how much can you trust that? And then the last one here, can you just stay healthy and get a little bit of luck? And I know that sounds like a duh, and it very much is, but that has very much always not been the case, unfortunately, for KU. I mean, it wasn't the case last year, right? Kevin McCullough gets injured. Hunter Dickinson's playing through injury. But how many times have we talked about a KU big man being injured for the postseason for KU, whether it was Udoka Azubuike or Cliff Alexander, Joel Embiid, or I don't know, was Cliff actually NCAA stuff? Whatever it was. Like, there have been so many examples of it that we're sick and tired of it. And can you have that good luck and good fortune with some injury stuff, with some health stuff, and where the ball bounces? Because that can be the difference in one game here or there over the course of the season. But that's our beginner's guide to the 2024 to 2025 season. Hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button. Certainly helps us out on our end of things if you're watching on YouTube. You can also check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe there as well for the audio version of things. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back tomorrow to have a KU Arkansas basketball exhibition preview. Also get our KU K-State football preview later this week as well. This is Locked On Jayhawks.